We're going to be talking about analytics, and really it's going to be, there'll be a little bit more emphasis on ideas than tactics, but as Maggie said, we will be staying on to get into answer questions, but also get into more tactical approaches. I think the thing is that I didn't want to be too focused on a specific tool for what I'm going to talk about. I'd rather that we have time at the end for you to say, well, here's the tool I'm using, how would this translate? Or here's my particular business challenge or organizational challenge, and address it that way. I won't go into more of my bio. I really just, Maggie's introduction makes me happy. 2 Octobers, as Maggie mentioned, we provide, one of the things that we do is help organizations with teaching and coaching. As an agency, what we found is that we could add more value if we took more of a teach people how to fish approach. That digital marketing used to be something that was kind of an annoying thing you had to do that was outside of your core business. And when I say used to, I mean, this would really be sort of whatever, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, depending on what vertical you're in. But now digital marketing, like, I mean, especially in the pandemic, but just generally, this is how we interact with customers is digitally and the constituents that we serve. So sort of being digital and being effective in digital channels needs to be part of an organization's culture, not just something you hire other people to do. And so we help organizations with that. We do also provide services. We're very, very proud to be a certified B Corporation, which means that in everything we do, we take into account the community, our workers, the environment, in addition to making money. So let me start with I feel like where we are today as a culture, I mean, especially in the circles that I travel in, we often mistake data for truth. That we think that if something looks like a number in a spreadsheet or in a report, that is a kind of objective truth that stands apart from, say, when a coworker says, "This is what I think about X," and that's, I really think that's a problem and misguided, and I'll get into a few of the ways in which in which data is not always truthful and in fact can run cross purposes with truth. But underlying that statement of data is not the same thing as truth is the idea that like sort of the complete truth is both complex but also mysterious, and that we want to boil things down into letters and numbers, but I guess part of my message today is that what we need to do is coexist with truth as analysts in a way, and do our best to help bring perspective and insights to truth. But as analysts, we like certainty, and truth is ultimately mysterious, and we're never gonna fully understand. If you're curious, that CE 071E is the hex code for the color of that flower. I mean, not that the flower only has one color, it's just one of an infinite range of color that the flower exhibits. So these are the things we're going to cover, and I won't go through and explain them because we'll get to them. So this is really just a teaser. I'm gonna hop right in. So hopefully you're familiar with the story of the blind men describing an elephant, and the idea of the parable is that if you can't see the elephant and you're you have to describe it, the person holding the tail says, well, an elephant is like a piece of rope. And the person holding the trunk says, well, an elephant is like a tree. And the person holding the ear is like, it's sort of like a blanket. And each person's experience is accurate and incomplete. And when we do analysis, this very much describes the task that we are put to, is that we're given sources of information that are pointers to a more complex picture, and we have to try to describe the more complex picture. And so that could be, how do customers come to your organization? How do people navigate through your website and experience your content? I mean, ultimately, hopefully you're after things like, how do we impact lives, or how do we create value for our customers? And that's even further away from the information that you have at hand. I think so you know, it all comes down to people. As an organization, your customers, the people you serve, are people, your people. And so the data that we look at is some aspect of human behavior in marketing. We're not really interested, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we're not interested in the particular shade of color of a flower. What we're interested in is, how do we influence people? How do we impact people? So these are the things that we want to know. We want to know, how do people become a customer? What makes them tick? But what we really get with data is in analytics data, which is presumably a lot of why you're here, is things that happen in a browser. And so those are impressions and clicks and scrolls and form submits, transactions, but not like, we may think that these things are representative of human behavior, but they really aren't. And I mean, part of the reason for that is that what it is a browser interaction, and a person may interact with your organization via multiple devices and multiple browsers over time. They may, if they're have privacy controls, you may not be able to understand that it's the same person from day to day or interaction to interaction. And that's only becoming increasingly true as more privacy controls come into place. So sort of, I am intentionally sort of creating fear and doubt. Like, is this going to be all about like how useless analytics data is? And it's mostly about how analytics data can be useful. But in the sort of topic area of the problematic nature of data, I love this quote from Donald Rumsfeld, not exactly acknowledged as a philosopher of our times, but this is a beautiful quote, especially as it pertains to what we do as analysts. And I hope you've probably read it by now, but I'll draw attention to the things we don't know that we don't know, which is really that same story of describing the elephant. Is, to the person holding the tail, they have no idea that an elephant has tusks, for example. They don't even, like, if they've never seen an elephant before, they don't have a framework with which to understand that a thing could have tusks. So it's beyond their realm of comprehension. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do we create a more accurate picture of the elephant, and I'll highlight that what we're going to go through is using different sources of information and knowledge, and combining them to create a picture. So this isn't about, like, if you just knew how to generate the right report in Google Analytics, that would get you to truth. Sort of, I would argue the bad but also good news is that that there is no such report in Google Analytics. That it is a human process, and it's a messy process of bringing together different sources of information. So I'm going to pause here for a second and say I am paying attention to chat. So if along the way you have a question or observation, yes. Sorry. So here I am paying attention to chat. So Daniel points out this was in the context of whether the U.S. was sure that Iraq had so-called weapons of mass destruction, and the that was the source of the quote. I still love the quote. And what's funny is that another quote in reference to the same problem was I can't remember the name of the general who described our inability to understand what was actually going on as a failure of imagination. And I think that sometimes as analysts we that is a failure that we experience, which is sort of the same idea of like what we want is truth, but what we have is data, and it takes imagination to understand the relationship between data and truth. So so making it real, I'll start out with a little anecdote. A long time ago, I worked for somebody who's still a friend, Peter Saul, and I was an engineer. I was a design engineer, and so we worked at a company that made store fixtures. Like we would build what went into a Starbucks or a J. Crew store. So we'd build the counters and the cabinets and everything that went into the store. And I, as a design engineer, what I would do is I would get what was really the equivalent of like a napkin sketch from a design firm, an architect, and who had no idea about codes or how to actually build the stuff that they design. They would say like needs to have this look, and then we would have to design it according to the materials we had at hand and codes, state and national codes, and etc. So what Peter said he said this to me one day, and it really stuck with me. It was, our job is to make it real, that we get this napkin sketch, and how we make money is we put the finished product on a truck, and whatever we're doing should be contributing to moving it from napkin sketch to something you can put on a truck, because that's how we make that was the nature, that was the business that we were in. And I think that idea of am I making it real has stuck with me in everything that I do. I'm like, what is it, why are we here? What is it that we're making real, and is what I'm doing right now contributing to the equivalent of getting the store fixtures onto the truck? So a few things about, like, so as from an analytics standpoint, how do we make things real? The first thing I'll emphasize is that we need to humanize data, and this is both in terms of how we think about it, and then it's how we talk about it and how we present it. And I'll use a couple of examples. So this is from our website, and I'll refer back to this later. And this is actually a blog post that Maggie co-authored, and it's great. I recommend it. But on the left is the data that comes out of Google Analytics. And one thing that I have been guilty of myself, and I see a lot, is that people look at the data they get out of their tools, and they stop there. I mean, so then maybe they put it in a spreadsheet and they generate charts or do VLOOKUPs or whatever tools that they're using. but they don't actually chase down where it comes from. And and I guess the thing the thing that's great about what we do is that the all the things on the left are things that you can visit. In fact, those are links right there. If you click on that, the little this little box here, it'll actually take you to the page and you can see what it is that people are visiting. So if it's on your own website, you may know well, but a lot of times you don't actually know what it is. And so creating an empathetic connection with the users that you're looking at. So down here we have, according to Google Analytics, 5,773 page views. Well, those are page views of, it's not entirely people, and we'll talk about that a little more, but it is probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 times that people pulled up this page. And if you think about that and the content that you created, it's a much more powerful connection. Like it's actually people reading this. I mean, like, back at you, Maggie, like you created this piece of content, and I can't remember, I think this was a few months worth of data, this piece of content that Maggie created, and thousands of people over the course of just a few months got value out of that data. I mean, that's so much more powerful than just looking at rows and numbers. Another example of this, and this was from some work that I did for a nonprofit that we worked with, and overall, and continue to work with, but overall, really what's central to their mission is how many people are they impacting. So I have this, and in the course of this was in 2020, 391,000 people visited their website. But to humanize it, I brought up including 6 people from the Faroe Islands. And I did this for a couple of reasons. I did it, I mean, one is just to anchor the fact that these aren't just numbers. I mean, these are people, but also to help them understand. I mean, part of the message here is that, I mean, this is gobsmackingly beautiful, but it's also tells you something about the variety of people that engage with the organization and the life experiences. Like I know that I often tend to just sort of assume that people are sort of savvy the way that I am in terms of navigating websites and consuming content. But you can imagine, like, this is what the Faroe Islands look like. It's not like Faroe Islands, like there's a big city somewhere that I'm not showing you a picture of. Like it is a very rural and remote place to live. And people from there are visiting this nonprofit to try to get information about, in this case, how to live well with Parkinson's. So it's creating this empathetic connection again with the visitor that is so much more valuable than just, again, columns and rows. So the next thing I want to emphasize is the idea that, but most of what we are trying to do is provide context. Like the tools we use provide data. What we can as human beings do is provide context, and a few examples of that. So
you can go take a shower and want me to go.
The sort of, we go from bad, better to best here. So and the example here is looking at page load time, and the very worst thing you can do is just essentially regurgitate data. Like if your role is in trying to organize, present, analyze data to the benefit of other people in your organization or outside of your organization, I would call the left just regurgitating. All it is you're cutting and pasting or whatever. You're essentially adding no value to what Google Analytics provides, or whatever tool. Next over is, let's provide a little bit of context. Like this is, I mean, let's assume that when our stakeholder sees 8.05, they don't understand that it's seconds. Well, let's explain. This is what it is in terms of seconds, and in the number below is how that metric compares to the previous time period. But even better is, okay, let's take what in the larger world, like, why is this valuable to me? Well, Google classifies page load speeds as good if they're between 0 and 2.5 seconds. And the average for this website is 8.05 seconds. Well, now I have context like, oh, that's not good. From a business standpoint, it's not a, most people understand the importance of Google. And if Google is saying that poor is above 4 seconds and we're at 8 seconds, I know I have a problem. So I've provided context around this data point. And this may feel a little basic to some of you, but I think this idea, like keeping a tick list of when you're providing context, just reminding yourself, like, what kinds of context can we provide to be useful? And I would put this in the category of, like, obvious, but we need reminding. And one of the things that I do is I teach analytics at university, and the students I teach are actually, a decent percentage of them are actually studying business analytics or marketing, and should have some familiarity with marketing data. And this is a problem that I run into over and over again, is data without context. So I think I believe where that comes from is that we sort of forget that the context that we developed as we were looking at the data isn't obvious to the person that we're sharing it with. So in our mind, we know this is better than last year, or we know this is better than our competitors or worse than our competitors, but we don't actually talk about it. So I won't talk through the whole list here, but just to say, like, giving, like, how does this compare? I mean, really, the word compare just could fit into any one of these statements. It's like, how does it compare over time? How does it compare to competitors? How does it compare across channels? And so this idea of don't just give a number, but like, one of the ways that we start to make it real is to say, this is the context. This is how this metric compares. As far as making it real, the last thing I'll emphasize here is the idea of minding your purpose as an organization. And maybe your purpose is to make money and sell in 2 years. Maybe your purpose is to change lives. But whatever it is, like, tie what the work that you're doing to the purpose of the organization. And maybe you're not used to thinking in terms of purpose. Mission is fine. Like, you should have, hopefully there's some version of why everybody shows up for work or does what they do what they do. Like, what's the organizing principle of the organization? And what we do in analytics should be in service of that purpose. This is very much the idea of, like, making it real, like loading it onto the truck. Is like, what is that purpose? Well, the purpose is the loading it onto the truck, the equivalent in that analogy. And what we should be doing is serving that purpose. And so ask yourself, or answer the statement, or fill in the blank here, like, analytics serves our purpose because. So in the case, the example that I described before, the organization that whose mission is to help people live well with Parkinson's, the analytics serves a purpose because the degree to which lives are impacted and the number of lives are impacted is how that organization holds itself accountable. And so data becomes essential in providing that feedback loop of, if our mission is to help people live well with Parkinson's, how well, how many people? Answering those questions is in direct service of the purpose of the business. So then the question is, so again, we're in service of purpose. And so how do we provide, as analysts, what is the output of our work? And being able to make insights useful and accessible to stakeholders, that's the essential task at hand. So I think one thing that we tend to do is we sort of wallow in data, and we spend a lot, like we do a lot of massing together data, and maybe we look at it long enough that we can sort of look down a column of numbers and feel excitement or disappointment. But our stakeholders don't have that benefit. They don't have our background. They don't have our necessarily our aptitude for looking at data. But they also just don't have the time, the hours spent looking at the data. So in terms of from a delivery standpoint, there are no shortcuts as far as providing simplicity. In this case, so back to the example, helping people live well with Parkinson's. Well, sort of a current focus of the organization is, hey, you know what, this is our mission, but we haven't been great at helping people live well with Parkinson's in communities of color. So sort of specifically saying, like, what they found as an organization is the people they were touching when they paid attention, it's like, it tends to be more affluent white people, and that's not our mission. Our mission is not to help affluent white people live well with Parkinson's, it's to help people live well with Parkinson's. And so putting together mechanisms to help them understand how are they doing, giving them the sense, and that's so again, like tying it directly to what is their purpose as an organization, and how can data help them fulfill that purpose. And this is what this is visualizing is the redder it is, these are places where they're doing worse, which means they can maybe look at the places where they're doing well and what are they doing that's working, and the places that they're not doing well, maybe trying harder to reach the entirety of the population, not just a biased subset of the population. So then, reiterating that what our stakeholders care about is truth, and what we care about as analysts tends to get into buzzwords pretty quickly. And I'm avoiding that right now. I'm happy to dive into buzzwords when we get into Q&A, and as Maggie said, we'll both stick around for a while after. So let's talk a little bit about what constructing truth in analytics. And you may have heard the expression up and to the right, and I've actually had this said directly to me because I've been in a role where I'm providing data and presenting data on behalf of organizations and CEOs and other people for a long time. And I have had somebody literally say to me, make it go up and to the right. And it is an expression, but I've had it actually happen to me, which is basically like, we want to tell a positive story, that there's a lot of sort of sales that goes on in internal organizational conversations. And if the CEO is presenting to investors, they want the graph to go up and to the right. They want to present a positive story. That's not, I'm going to put a twist on up and to the right. And so the things, to me, what the up and to the right I'm talking about here is that what we want to measure, the things that we want to measure that are impactful tend to be more difficult to measure. So the line here is this sort of optimal correlation between impact and difficulty. And a lot of what we measure in digital analytics are simple things like clicks and impressions. And they're things that we sort of get for free with the tools that we use. But how impactful, what's the impact of an impression? If your mission is to help people live well with Parkinson's, if your mission is to sell your organization in 3 years, I mean, maybe your organization is a content site and impressions have some meaning possibly. But in my experience, the things that actually create value are difficult and complex to measure. Slightly better are the things like form fills, transactions, which still mostly get done automatically. If we install tools, we need to do a little bit of configuring, but there isn't any sort of analysis that has to happen. Um, so teeny bit more difficult, not very impactful. If we think in terms of lives changed, lifetime value of customers, those things, this is where we get into the realm of we have to start to look at multiple data sources. We have to create models for what does lifetime value mean? How do I keep track of people over time? I probably need to start to do some inference because there is no exact way to keep track of a person over time. And so I need to have some model that has assumptions built into it to understand what that metric is. The other thing that I would caution you is that there are plenty of metrics that are difficult to measure and not impactful. So don't just assume like, oh, well, here's, Nico said things that are impactful are difficult. So I'm going to create this complex model to understand one of my favorite examples is attribution. that that we we wish that we had this way of knowing that here are all the touch points that influence whether or not somebody becomes a customer, and so we want to like people love talking about attribution models, and you can spend countless hours and invest in expensive tools to come up with attribution models. But the thing that none of those tools takes into account is, has somebody heard about you before? Like whatever it is, it's measuring behavior online digitally. And maybe a friend told a person about the business, and maybe the brand's has been around for a long time, and people have a positive association with a brand. That never plays into the digital attribution modeling picture. So to me, I mean, I'm happy if you want to stay after and talk about attribution. I love talking about attribution as much as the next person, but it's something that we tend to spend a lot of time on, and it's actually not that impactful because it's rarely anything close to the truth. It's really just what the tools we have at hand are capable of measuring. Um, so what is worth measuring? Simple test. If stakeholders find it valuable, it's worth measuring. Try talking to your whatever VP of sales or development about attribution models, and chances are they're going to be, okay, can you translate that into something that's useful? Because I have no idea what you're talking about. So easier metrics tend to get them for free. The more difficult metrics are, we really have to start to look at sources of data, combine information, create a model of, if the CEO says, well, in my experience, people tend to not make a decision when they first hear about us. Listen to that. They're probably right. Like even if your data in Google Analytics says, no, actually most people buy on their first, like if they're going to buy, they buy on their first visit. Well, they're probably right, and analytics is probably wrong. And so think critically and start to take sources of information, interview people within the organization, outside of the organization. It is a messy process. Okay, so what does that process look like? We'll start here. If I haven't made the point well enough yet, if Google Analytics were to be honest, and I actually sort of think it's funny that it isn't, like if you decided, you know what, I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon, I'm gonna go and get a degree in data science, and you tried to turn in an assignment to your professor on doing data analysis, and you didn't couch it in margin of error and the methodology and data collection and what the potential pitfalls would be and how you collect data, they would give you the paper back and say, okay, yeah, now finish it and then turn it in. But Google Analytics presents all this stuff as if it's true, but we've got users, which are not actually people. What that is a cookie, really. They have a couple other mechanisms for measuring users, but they're all completely flawed. And I've done my own testing, and they're profoundly flawed. Like if you that number does not represent individual people. Bounce rate, what bounce rate means is a single interaction, which could be different on every website. Somebody could spend half an hour reading Maggie's blog post and they still count as a bounce. Unless you have mechanisms in place to prevent that. Session duration, well, bad news is that sites get a lot of bot traffic, and the bot traffic, because it doesn't return the cookie typically, each session is a page view, and those average in as zeros. And so whatever you think your session duration is, it's not actually how long people spend on your website. So if Google Analytics actually produced an honest edition, you would be inherently you'd be like, wait a second, why are we using this at all? and there are reasons to use it. And so let's talk about that. So again, this idea of combining the, so a recipe for truth is how I started out this section. And so what are the ingredients of truth? Well, ingredients of truth are quantitative data, things like Google Analytics, data from platforms, and that could be Facebook, that could be whatever, YouTube, your email platforms. I think an area that people that have been doing marketing for a long time are very familiar with, and people that have been doing marketing more recently are less familiar with, but qualitative data and like surveying customers and gathering information, like if your goal is to change lives, the best way to find out if you're changing lives is to ask people. If your goal is to understand the customer journey, well, how did you hear about us? Information can be much more accurate and valuable than going into the multi-channel funnel report in Google Analytics. And then lastly, being able to combine internal data, like for something like lifetime value, this is critically important, is thinking about that as a data source. And I guess what I would say is that as digital marketers, if we're only looking at that top bullet, then we're like, it's as if we're trying to bake a cake, but we're only using the ingredients that we get out of the refrigerator. And it's not to say maybe there's such a, I don't know, it's hard to imagine a cake that you can get ingredients out of the refrigerator and not any sugar, flour, chocolate, and have it be a cake that you'd want to eat. Somebody is probably sitting there thinking, oh, you don't know about such and such cake. And that's probably true. And that's true with data, that there are times when we can provide profound insights with just the data, the digital analytics data that we collect alone. But really what you're trying to do most of the time is flawed from the start, because you're not taking into account these other sources. So my analogy here is a recipe, and I was thinking about that I do have a little bit of a guilty pleasure in watching MasterChef and like cooking shows, and so that framework was in my head, and so in terms of analyzing the data, and again, I'm going to draw from having, like, for many semesters assigned this sort of comprehensive analytics assignment to my students, and observing the ones that are most successful, and like how did they do it differently? And it's, I mean, the differences are striking. Like what are the things that I can say I see over and over again from the work that really stands out? And one is, again, this idea of purpose. I don't need to reiterate that, but and this is super analogous to, if any of you watches cooking shows, is like you have to have passion for what it is you're doing. Like it comes across. Like if you don't particularly care, then your audience isn't going to care either. Your stakeholders aren't going to care. And so what matters to you? And if the outcomes don't matter to you, if turns out that you're supposed to be preparing marketing data and you don't actually like marketing, maybe it's time to find a different job, because hopefully if you do care about analytics, what moves you? And I don't think you probably need to find a different job, because at the end of the day, most of us, what we care about is making people happy, creating value for our customers, things like that. And it's a lot easier to get passionate about that than it is clicks and impressions. This next one I think is not obvious at all, but I really believe that it's very important. And sort of, again, for those of you that watch cooking shows, the judges will often provide this feedback of like, I'm not getting you in this dish. Like it's technically well executed, but where are you? Like, I want more of you. And it's funny that this matters, but it really does. Is that don't treat it as if like you're a data crunching robot. Like, bring your own voice and your own perspective into the works that you do, and that will shine through, and it will provide more value. Like at the end of the day, like you're doing this because you have experience, you have passion, you have insight, and let yourself be in the work, the analysis that you're doing. Don't make the task to be like, if I were perfectly successful at this, I'd be like a Google machine learning algorithm. That's not true. If you were perfectly successful at it, you are you. Um, and I'm just saying this from my own experience of the work that I've seen my students do, is when they bring themselves to it, the work, I mean, that's when the work shines. And that's when it compels me. And I'm like, I see what you're saying, and you've influenced my point of view. The last one is that we, and this again was very analogous to food preparation. Think about where it could go wrong. Think about the people that you're doing the work on behalf of, your stakeholders, and imagine that they're going to cut it apart, because some of them possibly will. And so look for the flaws, because there's nothing worse than putting a dish in front of Gordon Ramsay and having him say, this is the worst souffle I've ever tasted. Obviously translate that into your own environment. Like, what are the reasons that the work that you're doing might be problematic? And examples of that would be, you say this many people became customers, and the CEO says, no, that many people didn't become customers. Or you say, this is how many people you touched, and the person you're talking to has said, well, yeah, that's how many people we touched that you could measure in YouTube. That's not how many people we touched, and it bothers me that you think of it that way. So I'm not going to go too deep into this. I'm actually going to point you back to that blog post that Maggie co-authored, because it's really great. And in terms of sort of, in the analogy, the plating, how you present data, that the process of presenting data, I think the things that I would emphasize, having that question, which is really very, very tied to purpose. We talked about providing context. And I guess the other thing is, like in the examples that I've given, I think you see that when I present data, it tends to be simple. Like I try to boil it down, and maybe you'd say, well, the example you gave of page load speeds didn't seem too simple. I provided the right amount of context, but I wouldn't probably present any more than that on a given page, or however I'm communicating the data. But I strongly recommend that you search this, and Maggie we'll send a follow up and send a link. So then the last thing is, like, and again, I actually really like this analogy, because when we're preparing stuff, like at the end of the day, if the people that we're preparing for don't find it valuable, then we fail. And so creating this virtuous cycle, creating this feedback loop, and listening and learning and adjusting the data that we collect and how we analyze it and the insights that we share. And that's when, like, from the standpoint of like one way that I would put it is that like analytics might be a noun, but an analytical organization, that's an adjective, and that's when everybody in the organization is collaborating around the use of insights and data, and that's what you're aspiring to. And so if you think about this sort of one directional, like I'm preparing data and whatever, we create that dashboard. We don't even know whether our clients or stakeholders are even looking at it. Well, that would be akin to me running a restaurant and I don't actually know if anybody eats the food, right? Like what kind of restaurant is that? I'll end with sort of circling back the idea of like, so for 2 Octobers, in the process of becoming a B Corp, we did a lot of introspection into why are we here? What do we do? And we're very much a culture of helpers. Like we love helping. I mean, it's actually a problem that we have to kind of manage within the organization, is that like one of the main reasons people don't get their work done is because they're helping somebody else. In fact, I would say the main reason, almost like the only reason, is that a coworker says, could you help me with this? Or a client says, could you help me with this? And we all bend over backwards. And so we need to be really good at time management, because if we spend all of our time helping other people, sometimes we don't get our own work done. So one of in this culture of helping, as we try to figure out, well, what is our purpose? Well, our purpose is to help organizations have a positive impact. And so part of that was so we came up with a metric of in terms of the organizations that we work with, what is their focus, and are they having a positive impact, and are we helping them have the positive impact? And we came up with a simple metric of sort of the purpose-driven percentage is what the metric is. And now every quarter we look at this purpose-driven percentage of the work that we do and the clients that we work with, and how much of it is purpose-driven, which is, I guess I didn't really think about the fact that the word purpose exists both in the title being purposeful and what I'm suggesting you do, but also in the metric that I'm using as an example. That's not intentional, but the idea is that this metric becomes sort of a precise expression of our purpose as an organization. And so I guess just sort of what I want to leave you with is what do you want to impact? Like hopefully you love your job. And if you don't, try to make changes so you love your job. And if that means a different job, do that. But at the end of the day, like what are you passionate about, and tie the work that you're doing from an analytics standpoint to that.